So in this section, we're going to look at the different types of connective tissue. We're going to get some basics about their characteristics and nervous tissue. All right, so we're just going to look at a general overview here, and we're going to start with three types of cartilage here. So what you want to do when you're looking at the cartilage is you want to learn to recognize the lacunae, and this kind of appears as octopus suckers. So first here we're looking at elastic cartilage. Lacunae are spaces with cells called chondrocytes. They kind of look like octopus suckers. The lacunae, that's what lets you know that you have cartilage. And then you're going to need to decide what kind. So there are two things to look for. One, and there are some exceptions to this, in elastic, the lacunae is very dense. There's a lot of them in a small place. And so they're very tightly packed, especially when we compare that to like hyaline cartilage. And two, and this is a little bit better way, in the elastic matrix, and remember matrix is kind of like the jello if you had fruited jello. Every space not occupied by lacuna is very rough looking in appearance. And the elastic fiber looks like scratches, and you can see that here in this little section that I have circled. You can see those elastic fibers that it contains, and they look a bit like scratches, okay? So E for elastic, you're going to find it in the ear and epiglottis. That's one way to remember it. So dense lacunae and a very rough looking matrix. It doesn't have a nice glassy appearance. It looks scratched. So in hyaline cartilage, we have lacunae, but the matrix is a lot smoother. This has a more glassy appearance to it. It's hard to see that glassy appearance in a picture when you're not looking at the actual slide itself. It also generally has a less tightly packed lacunae. You have lots of space here between the lacunae and the chondrocytes. Most articulating joints are covered in cartilage. The meniscus, for example, is hyaline cartilage. Ribs, costal cartilage, nose. All right, and so those are some of the locations where you'll find this. So look for more spaced lacunae. It's less dense in hyaline, and you have a smoother look to the matrix than the elastic cartilage. You don't see any scratchy looking things. So fibrocartilage is the last of the three types of cartilage, which is part of our connective tissue. We have lacunae here, but they're not near as obvious, but you can see in this little circled portion, we do have some white space, and we have a lacuna, and then we have that dense little portion in the middle. Okay, so you can still see the whitish space surrounding a chondrocyte. That is important because sometimes people mistake fibrocartilage for muscle. Okay, so be careful. So the lacunae look different, but you also have striations, and that's the appearance of fibers going along in the same direction. It kind of looks wispy cloud-like in this particular tissue. Really important, I can't stress enough to recognize the white portion there around the lacuna and the striations, so you don't confuse this with muscle. You're more likely to misidentify it as muscle than one of the other types of cartilage because the chondrocytes and lacunae are so much smaller. You'll find this in areas like the intervertebral disc. Those act as a cushion. Also in the pelvis at the pubic symphysis. This is where you will find it. So one of the next types of connective tissue, and as you go through your lab lessons, you're going to learn about the different types, is adipose. And this one is really easy to organize. Don't miss this one. This is actually what we call body fat, and it appears as big white blobs. Okay, there can be brown fat, but most of the time what you're going to see is white. So each white blob is a cell, and we call that an adipocyte or adipocyte. They're fat cells. They hold a large amount of fat like triglycerides, lipids, and cholesterol. So the white portion here is all the lipid. The purple dot on the exterior of the membrane here is actually the nucleus, and you can see that's pointed out here. It actually kind of gets shoved and pushed to the edges to the sides. So it's very hard to see, but some of them you can see it. You can only see the nucleus on the sides usually there. Okay, So this is pretty much found anywhere in your body that you have fat, which we know can be in lots of places. So next here, this example is one of my favorites. I will usually call it areolar. It is also called loose connective tissue, and I just think this is a very pretty tissue. It looks kind of like a spider web or a Jackson Pollock painting, and there are lots of features here that you need to know on areolar. I personally find this one pretty easy to identify. I have had some students that don't learn the features and then they struggle, but if you learn these features, it's hard to mistake this for anything else for this areolar tissue. You've got thick pink fibers, and these are collagen, or we can sometimes say collagenous, all right? So the thick fibers that are more pinkish, these are going to be collagen. Then we also have some thinner fibers over here. Look on the left, you can really see the distinction of elastin, and they're more purplish, they're darker, okay? And so that we say elastic fibers or elastin, either of those words is okay. We also have cells in there. We have some mast cells, which are a type of immune cells. We have some interstitial cells, some white blood cells, different things in there, okay? So you need to be able to identify these. So typically you're going to find loose connective tissue right under epithelia, okay? Cells are definitely visible here in the matrix of this areolar tissue, and so we do say it has a matrix here as well. All right, so the next type of connective tissue that we need to focus on is dense regular connective tissue. Dense regular connective tissue. This is similar to fibrocartilage because they both have striations, but they all go in the same general direction. And you may see some cells here as I have identified here on the left, but these are not chondrocytes in lacunae. These are fibroblasts, so you don't see much white around these, all right? And so you might occasionally see white near one, but if you look the overall appearance, these don't have white. And so sometimes you might want to zoom in close to look at those and to be able to distinguish, are these fibroblasts or are these chondrocytes, okay? So they won't have the white surrounding them. They'll just look kind of like purple blobs. You find this in different tendons and ligaments and where things need to be very strong. This is a very strong type of tissue. So you may not realize that blood is actually a type of connective tissue here. This one really should be one of the easiest to identify. This isn't the clearest picture, but you can see lots of these. They look purple from the stain. Red circles, those are what we call erythrocytes, or red blood cells. And I'm talking about the ones that we have the most of. All of these here, these are little red blood cells. They're biconcave disc, all right? We do also have some white blood cells here. We have leukocytes. These are all white blood cells or leukocytes, and they are typically larger than the red blood cells. And if you look really closely, you can see some cell fragments here, some little dark portions. They just kind of look like little dots in there. Those are what we call platelets, and these are all going to be features that you will need to be able to identify. But this should be a pretty easy one to learn. But you need to be sure that you remember that blood is a connective tissue. So compact bone is another one that is pretty easy to identify. It has these very obvious concentric circles that look kind of like a piece of wood, like the rings on a piece of wood. The purpose of this structure is to nourish and help regulate osteocytes in the bone matrix. The concentric circles themselves we call an osteon, and you're going to need to be able to identify that. So one circle there, that is an osteon, and they surround what we call a haversian or central canal, and that's going to be this opening here in the middle. That is a haversian or central canal. Okay, either word is fine. And so those are circular vessels. They run the length of the bone, and they supply different blood vessels and all for osteocytes. And so in the matrix, you're going to find things like calcium salts deposited on collagen, and that is what forms the different layers. And then some of the features that you're going to look at are going to be haversian canal, lacuna, osteocytes, and lamellae. All right. Spongy bone looks quite a bit different than compact bone. You've got empty spaces that are large marrow cavities. There should be an M there, a large marrow cavity. Those are going to be lined by osteoblast and osteoclast, which help with the bone remodeling. They help lay down and remove bone, okay? We also call this the endosteum. And then that's one of the layers. And then we also have an outer layer that we call the periosteum. And so you will have to look at a few of these slides, but it is still pretty easy to recognize there as spongy bone, because spongy bone is kind of like a sponge. It's got lots of openings and hollow chambers in it for that marrow. So lastly, here is an example of a neuron. We don't get too deep into nervous tissue. When you look at the website, when you do your assignment, there are lots of other slides of nervous tissue, and we just really want to learn the basics. So we're going to learn how to identify a neuron, the cell body of the neuron, which is going to be this main portion here. So a neuron here, and there's lots of different types and shapes of neurons, but it has what we call dendrites, and then a center portion that you would call the neuron. The dendrites are these long portions that extend out, okay? And so you can see some dendrites right there and right there. And then you can see here they have a nucleus, all right? And so that does it for the introduction, and I hope this will help you to understand as you go through your lab activities what to look for and how to really focus on understanding what you're looking at and not just rote memorization. If you just try to rote memorize these, you are not going to do very well in your lab exam, okay? So really focus on learning the characteristics, and good luck.